Hello and welcome to this video for ChessGoals. This is James Fazzolari, co-author of the recently released Queen's Indian Defense course on the YouTube channel. Matt and I recently put up a preview of the course, Chapter 1, covering 4G3, the main line of the Queen's Indian Defense. And I thought in combination with that video, it might be helpful for you, the viewer, to see some of my recent games. Exploring where you can go after the course material ends and the middle game begins. So I've got 3 games lined up from this week. These are all blitz games I've played, so the play is not perfect, but we can all learn from my instructive mistakes. So we'll begin. And I'd like to start with this position, 7 knight c3. This is the start of theory in the course mainline, Chapter 1, covered in the recent video. Covered in Chapter 2 are the move 7 alternatives, including Queen c2, d5, Rook e1, and b3. But 7 knight c3 is overwhelmingly the main move. We proceed as follows with knight f4. The idea of this move is, well, we're mostly just threatening to take on c3 and double the pawns, but we're also preparing the move f5, and any trade of minor pieces is good for us. The defender, we have a space disadvantage, so trading one set of minor pieces, quite nice for us. It reduces the impact of the space advantage. Now white in this game played the move 8 bishop f4, which is not covered in the course. It's a fine move, it's just a developing move, but it doesn't put us under any real pressure. More common in this position are Queen c2 or Bishop d2, as covered in the course, and this allows us to follow up with d6. So the generally recommended development scheme in the course is d6, knight d7, queen e8, and f5, establishing good control of e4 and finishing development of our minor pieces. The move bishop f4 does not prevent that, so that's the plan I went with. And I will also note the bishop on f4 does run now into these solid pawns, so it's not a particularly strong bishop. Queen c2, forcing our knight to move. Now knight takes c3. Knight takes c3 instead of f5 because we do want that exchange of minor pieces, and we haven't yet developed the rest of our position enough to justify playing f5 and creating a weakness on e6. My opponent plays b takes c3. We do cover similar positions in the course. This introduces a key tactic in the Queen's Indian. White's actually threatening knight g5, simultaneously threatening checkmate on h7, but also unveiling their bishop to attack our undefended bishop on b7. Now in the course, I recommend the move knight c6 here. That is the best move, but for some reason I played f5. F5 is fine. It does prevent the tactic because now the queen is not looking at h7. But when you're playing in the middle game, it's very important to understand what are the imbalances and what are the strategic objectives in the position, more or less what are the weaknesses. And in this position, each side has a bishop pair and a knight, so there's no material imbalance, but there is a structural imbalance, these two double pawns. And so it would have made a lot more sense to play knight c6 with the idea of knight a5 targeting this weak c4 pawn. In that middle game, white would have had 2 weak pawns on the c file, and we would have still had this pawn on f7, and so we would have had no weaknesses that white can attack. So black is strategically better and would have had an advantage. f5 means we don't have an advantage, but still an even position. From here, both sides play some developing moves. Bishop e4 is a nice move, just making the bishop that little bit more active. Instead of only impacting the long diagonal, it now also controls some squares on this diagonal, which is quite useful. Queen b3, looking at this weak e6 pawn I created for no reason, so queen c8 defending the pawn. Knight g5 putting more pressure on the pawn and preparing the move c5. But just in time, we have the move h6 driving the knight back, so no big deal there. And now finally knight c6, a move I should have played earlier. but the knight will still be quite good coming to a5, driving away this queen so that there's no pressure on e6, and then piling up pressure on c4. Both sides continue improving their pieces, and when the queen comes to a4, something we do talk about in the course is the power of this move, queen e8, offering a queen trade. With the queens coming off the board, white has no compensation for these doubled pawns. White really wants to keep the queens on so that they can dream of an attack against our king. With the queens off and material being even, only black can be better here with these two weak pawns as targets. And then my opponent immediately goes wrong, playing knight d2 to defend this pawn, but missing a nice tactic. So we have simply g5, bishop e3, f4, and that bishop is trapped. And in this position, my opponent played on for a few more moves. So e3, rook f7, f3, king h7, preparing to bring the rook to the open file. And after king f2, my opponent resigned. It wasn't a premature resignation. We are up a full piece for a single pawn, but additionally, white does have these weak pawns that we'll be able to pick off later. So pretty standard Queen's Indian middle game. Nothing too fancy. You can see we didn't really do anything other than get our pieces out and try and move forward. And when we saw one lesson from this game is when we saw b takes c3, the better response was this knight c6 move, not creating a weakness with f5. Generally in the course, we don't play f5 until we've already improved our other pieces with knight d7 and queen e8 so that the e6 pawn is not too much of a liability. So that was game one. So now in game two, we'll get to the starting position of the variation. Oh, sorry, I need this to be from the black perspective. There we go. So knight c3. And then we follow up with knight e4, which is the recommendation in the course. And now queen c2. Now this is the most popular move in the club database and therefore our main line in the course. And it's a really important one. As explained previously, we continue with knight takes c3, trading a pair of minor pieces. And again, my opponent goes with this b takes c3. We do cover in a lot of detail in the course the move queen takes c3, which is the best move, leading to even positions, which is a good outcome for black immediately out of the opening. Again, white is threatening knight g5 with the discovery on b7 and a checkmate threat on h7. This time I play the right move, I play knight c6. So now that now the move knight g5 doesn't attack our bishop, we can just take on g5 and win a piece. So knight c6 is great, bishop f4, just developing a piece, d6, blunting the bishop, which was attacking the c7 pawn. This means that our queen can move away. Probably going to go to e8, and then we're going to play f5, at which point we've got an excellent position. Both sides improve their pieces, and we start by improving our knight with an attack on this pawn. So in this exact position, black has no weaknesses. There are no weak squares or pawns that the white pieces can attack, but we can absolutely attack this c4 pawn. And the other benefit of the knight coming to a5 is it does defend the bishop on b7. So now a move like knight e5, unleashing an attack on our bishop and trying to skewer us to the rook, we could just take. So knight a5, very good move. Now my opponent, quite a strong player here, rated about 2000, played c5, and this is the top engine move, just liquidating the pawn. White sacks the pawn, but will have some activity afterwards, and I think that's a very sensible approach. We'll play through that. So takes, and now bishop takes. So black is a clear pawn up, but we now do have to worry about this c7 pawn, and white has good active pieces. I would also say that our knight on a5 is now completely misplaced without the target on c4. So white enjoys a good amount of compensation for the pawn. I don't know if it's full compensation, but it's a good amount. Rook ad1, white develops their last piece. Now I played queen c8 here, and my idea was just rook d8, trading the first set of rooks, penduluming the queen over, and then trading off the other rook. I think in retrospect, just queen e7 was better, but what did I play? Well, I played queen c8, so that's what we're going to live with. Knight g5, threatening checkmate, which is a very good move because after g6, which is forced, now there are weak squares around our king that we're going to have to guard. So knight e4 makes sense, preparing to come into f6. So bishop e7 guarding that square. Bishop h6, fighting for these dark squares and attacking our rook. Rook d8, rook takes, queen takes. The other rook comes to the file, and now queen e8. And this idea is the one I was alluding to earlier, and it's also an idea covered in the course. This pendulum queen move comes up in the Queen's Indian, and it's a way to liquidate all the rooks, hopefully leaving you with better minor pieces. Tactically, I will point out that the knight on a5 is doing an excellent job of guarding the bishop, so that moves like knight f6 check don't win our bishop on b7. So for now, the knight is not misplaced, but we will need to improve it in the future. White continued with c4, rook d8, trading off the next set of rooks, queen c3. And we're not yet into strategic play. Chess is very often exclusively about tactics, with strategy a distant second thought. And white is threatening checkmate on g7 and also threatening invasions on these squares. So we need to be careful. f6, forced, c5. And here I missed a tactic, which can happen to anyone, but it shows that you always need to be looking. In the game, I played bishop takes e4, bishop takes, and then taking the pawn on c5, winning another pawn. But we had a much better move after c5. We actually do have queen check, forcing bishop f3, which undefends this knight. And better than being up a pawn is being up a full piece. So never stop looking for tactics, and even in these not too sharp Queen's Indian positions, there can always be tactics lurking. But in any event, bishop takes e4, bishop takes e4, bishop takes c5, and at this point, we are just winning. We are a full 2 pawns up, and all we need to do is trade some minor pieces to reduce the pressure against our king. So that's our primary strategic goal, and then just push these pawns on the queen side, create a passed pawn. That should be decisive. So some maneuvering, offering a queen trade, which my opponent accepts, which makes our life even easier. This e5 move, further blunting this bishop and getting in a free pawn advance is very nice. Oops, sorry. Let's go back to relevant position here. Attacking our knight, we don't want to give up that knight, so knight c4 counter-attacking the bishop. Now, my opponent pinned, but we do have b5, and after some more pawn exchanges, our knight is still protected. And from here, it's a fairly clinical, technical win. We just need to create an additional threat. So the king is blockading one passed pawn, but if we can create another one, there'll be 2 passed pawns, and that's simply going to be too much for white to stop. So that's what's happening here. And indeed, we can actually sacrifice this pawn to activate our king and win this pawn, at which point we will have 3 passed pawns, which is way, way too many. And so that's what might have happened, but my opponent instead commits everything to stopping this pawn. At this point in time, pushing this pawn is winning. I went with a more direct route of removing the defender of the square, and in this position my opponent resigned. So really what happened in this game is we just played a bunch of theory. Our opponent went into the b takes c3 structure, and we played the correct course recommended move of knight c6, identifying these are long-term weaknesses we would like to attack. We just applied pressure to those pawns, until we won one. Once we were a pawn up, our opponent went in for sort of desperate attacking play, giving up another pawn. We survived the attack, and that left us 2 pawns up in the endgame. So pretty low effort win, but that's pretty common in the Queen's Indian. You just play solidly. If your opponent wants to really have any winning chances at all, they need to play risky, and that's going to give you fantastic winning chances as well. So for our third and final game, we've got a much stronger player rated over 2100, and let's get to the critical position. Sorry, again, we've got the colors. So knight c3 here, knight e4 is recommended, and then d5. Now this is a positional mistake, and it's explained in the course. It's a positional mistake because it allows, again, this knight takes c3 move, b takes c3, and now d6, just cementing this c5 square. In the long run, we would like to play e5, and then maneuver a knight into c5. We're not, with the pawn already advanced to d5, we don't have knight c6, knight a5 available, so we're not going to try too hard to win this pawn, because we're only ever going to be able to put one attacker on it with bishop a6, which we might still play, but it's when you can only apply a single attacker, white can usually defend, so you don't want to try too hard to win the pawn. You can always come back and try and win it later. So now knight d4, it's the main move in the position, e5, forcing the knight to move, and after knight f5, it's worth mentioning this bishop is now pretty bad, and this bishop is now pretty bad. So we would actually be quite happy if the knight takes the bishop, getting rid of our bishop that's very passive behind our pawn chain. So that's the idea of bishop c8. Our bishop was staring into this pawn, so now it is much more active, attacking this knight, and we're trying to encourage knight takes. We're probably not going to play bishop takes ourselves, but we might continue with something like bishop f6 and g6 to drive the knight away. In any event, queen c2, defending the knight, and now knight a6. As mentioned earlier, we've got this very juicy square on c5, so that's where our knight is going. Why did the knight go to a6? Well, if it went to d7, it would obstruct this bishop, and there's no need to do that. Now my opponent made this exchange. They do win the bishop pair here, but I think in this position, this knight is going to be so strong, and this bishop is going to be so passive that we're quite happy giving up the bishop pair. I will note in this position, we could have played bishop f6, g6, but I don't think that's necessary. That does weaken 2 squares around our king. They still have a dark square bishop, and that might give them some attacking chances that they never got in this game. Certainly no need, in my opinion, to complicate things in that way. So knight takes e7, queen takes e7, e4, that makes sense, taking some more space. And now f5, which is well prepared with the bishop already on c8, so that if they take, we can capture back with tempo. That would allow them to trade off their light square bishop after probably we take, they take on e4 and then knight c5, but then we've developed this knight with tempo. We still have the superior minor piece against their bishop. We still have these 2 pawns to attack later. So I'd be very happy with that position. a4, maybe thinking about a5, knight c5, putting pressure on this pawn, which my opponent defended with f3. I don't think that's the best move, because now, after we take and they take, this is a permanent weakness that they're going to have to defend, and we can put more attackers on the pawn. So I think this really tied my opponent down to defensive play for the rest of the game. And I would note in this position that this pawn, this pawn, this pawn, and this pawn are all weak and might drop off. We could even look at something like a5, bishop d7 with 2 permanent attackers on this pawn, tying down queen and rook, which is a really nightmare position. But I went for bishop a6, attacking this pawn. This is a well-timed move because bishop f1 to defend is not available, so the only way to defend is actually to tie the queen down. My opponent exchanged rooks. At this point in time, I have an active rook on the open file and they have a passive rook. This allows bishop f1, but their position is now very passive. It's not clear where this dark square bishop is going to develop meaningfully other than e3, and it's not clear where this rook is going because f1 is occupied. So a very good strategic position for black, and all of this has really resulted out of these doubled pawns being an unnecessary liability that white has taken on. The queen f6, I was just looking to start infiltrating with my queen. I really want to come to f3. I did look in the game at bishop f1, rook takes f1, king takes f1, bishop takes c4, but I don't think that's enough. Black's still better, in my opinion, because of these weaknesses, but I don't think this is enough to give up the exchange. So, but you always want to be looking at exchange sacrifices. So now bishop e3, trying to trade for our strong knight. And that's really the one trade we're not happy to make. This knight is the best minor piece on the board. It's better than either of the bishops. So I played knight b7 here, and my idea was just knight a5, increasing the pressure on the c4 pawn. If we can win the c4 pawn, or at least a pawn up, and we're one step closer to maybe winning some of these other pawns as well, at which point we will be winning. So bishop e2, covering the queen infiltration and preparing rook f1. Good move. Knight a5 with pressure on c4. Rook f1, queen e7, and now queen is forced all the way to a2 to defend this pawn. Pretty sad. We have rook f1, bishop f1, and now queen f7, renewing the threat of infiltrating. And additionally, if bishop g2 to defend this square, then we can take here. So the queen is coming into the position, or white is losing a pawn. I don't know what the best choice is. It's all pretty bad. So bishop f2, giving some more shelter to the king. But now queen f3, and we have successfully infiltrated with an attack on this pawn and that pawn. It's very likely that we're going to start gobbling up material. My opponent tried queen b1, defending here and allowing us to take this pawn. I played queen takes c3, which looking back I don't think is the most accurate move. I do think better was bishop takes c4, and after bishop takes c4, knight takes c4. The knight is coming into d2, which gives us a tremendous advantage, and I think this would have been better than what was played. On the other hand, this does allow queen b5, threatening checkmate, also attacking the knight. Well, not threatening checkmate, but threatening back rank issues. So now knight d2, queen e8, queen f8 forced, and now queen e6. We're not getting checkmated here, but we are suddenly under pressure. Pressure that we didn't need to be under. This was, like I said, a blitz game with both players now getting quite low on time. I think we were both under a minute at this point. So I didn't see any reason to allow any counterplay. And I think that's generally a good policy in blitz games when time gets low. If you can have a nice, clear, active plan and your opponent has no counterplay, it's going to be a lot easier for you to handle the position as the clock gets low. So I went with queen takes c3. I think that's a good practical choice. We can always win this pawn next. And like I said earlier, the e4 pawn is a fixed target. It isn't going anywhere. We can win it later. Now my opponent played c5, and this is a losing blunder that I did not punish. I played bishop takes f1, but that is sorry, bishop f1 is correct. Sorry. Then my opponent played c takes b6, and then I blundered with c takes b6, not allowing a pawn to come to the 7th. But on further review and calculation, in this position, we actually had the winning move, bishop d3 attacking the queen. Then pawn takes on a7, we can take the queen. They make a new queen, and our king does run away. In this position, white does not have an attack against our king, and we are a full piece up. Very likely to checkmate white very soon. I didn't want to calculate any of this with little time on my clock, so cb6, just holding everything together. We're material up now with still all these weaknesses to pick off, so black should just be winning very easily. king takes f1, knight c4, activating the knight and with a big threat, which is always nice. Queen b5. Now this is threatening checkmate. So after queen d3 check, king g1, just improving our queen, we have h6 so that we have an escape square for our king. My opponent went in for the check anyway, and with queen d7 is trying to set up a perpetual check, but that is well met with just queen e4, queen takes e4 rather, controlling the f5 square. And at this point we're now 2 pawns up, so completely winning. We just need to push a passed pawn, hopefully trade some more pieces as well. Queen takes a7, I don't think is particularly strong because while it does regain a pawn, the white king is without many defenders and the queen and knight are a well-known strong attacking force. So I started with queen takes d5, getting access to this square for checks, covering this square as well. And after bishop takes b6, further undefending the king, I went in for queen takes d1, king g2, and queen e2 check, forcing the king to h3. When we have, I can just put it on the board, so king h3, check here, and when the king comes to g4, we have h5 check, king takes, and this is going to be checkmate very soon. So black was winning in the final position. White couldn't actually regain these pawns. I would say the big takeaway again in this one is the danger of b takes c3, which really does allow black to go after these long-term weaknesses. In terms of other lessons to take away, you want to look at in these middle game positions when you get something like this position here. Where are the weaknesses? What squares do my pieces want to be on? What are the good pieces in the position? So I see a bunch of pawns fixed on white squares, so my light square bishop is going to be quite good. With all these pawns fixed on light squares, I know that their light square bishop is going to be pretty bad, and I know that this knight is the best piece on the board. It's just attacking so many good squares. I know that I don't want to trade that knight off. So identifying those factors being present in the position led to the plan of going after these pawns and using the knight to apply more pressure as well. It's entirely possible that a more accurate approach could have been something like a5 and bishop d7, or bishop d7, knight b7 and knight a5 to avoid this trade with bishop e3. But who's to say? I haven't really analyzed it with a computer, but that's how you find your middle game plan in these Queen's Indian type positions. You identify what are the imbalances, where are the weaknesses in the position, and then improve your pieces accordingly. One of the benefits of playing the Queen's Indian is most often we don't have any weaknesses that we need to defend. It's a very solid structure in the Queen's Indian, and so we're doing the strategic positional play, the grinding, and they're needing to defend. So I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you also enjoy the video, the free preview of Chapter 1. And if you like what you've seen, please consider buying the course. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the ChessGoals YouTube channel. And if you have any questions for me, please feel welcome to join the ChessGoals community in the Discord, where I do answer questions from the viewers. So until next time, this is James for ChessGoals, and please, each of you, enjoy your games with the Queen's Indian defense.